Spyro has been around for over 25 years, which is absolutely insane. The franchise is chocked full of history, so I thought I could do a Spyro iceberg video. I was able to dig up some crazy Spyro facts that I think have never seen the light of day, so I'm excited to reveal those to you today. Ladies and gents, here is over 100 Spyro facts, done iceberg style. For those who are not familiar with an iceberg video, the tip is typically the most commonly known Spyro facts, but as we go deeper down the iceberg, we will get to lesser known facts until we reach the abyss, which is the most uncommon Spyro facts. With that said, let's begin. Though Spyro started off as a PlayStation star, through a number of reboots he eventually became the pseudo-face of the Skylanders series, the famous Toys to Life franchise created by Toys for Bob. The creative choice in terms of his design was definitely something that turned a lot of original purists away from the entire franchise. However, Toys for Bob would later regain favor in droves when they remastered the original Spyro trilogy in the Spyro Reignited trilogy. Spyro Reignited added a bunch of quality of life improvements to the original, like dual stick camera controls, but one of the changes that they added across the board for all three games was adding roll. Roll was originally only in the original Spyro 1, but was taken out in later sequels. But Toys for Bob decided to re-add the roll for not only Spyro 1, but for the following sequels as well. Another change that they added was the Gem Finder. Gem Finder was a feature in the original games that was added in later sequels. However, it was not present in the original game. Additionally, you had to unlock the feature in Spyro Year of the Dragon through a series of Dragonfly levels. However, Toys for Bob decided to add Gem Finder across all three games, using the exact same controls and no longer requiring you to play those blasted Dragonfly levels to have to unlock it. Speaking of the third game, a fan favorite set of minigames was skateboarding, but if you look carefully, when Spyro goes to flip, a sticker of Ripto is found on the bottom of the skateboard. Another cool fact is that Spyro has appeared as a guest character and was essentially his siblings' game, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, and eventually Crash Team Rumble. Psst, get used to this face, you're going to see him show up a couple of times. Spyro was a playable character in CTR along with Hunter and his sworn enemy, Gnasty Gnorc. Additionally, an entire Grand Prix was organized for Spyro, which was called Spyro and Friends, which included a dedicated Spyro racetrack, along with cosmetics, and even skins for the non-Spyro cast. If you only played the Spyro Reignited trilogy, then you may not know this fact. At the end of Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon, the end credits reveal that Gnasty Gnorc and Ripto are in fact alive, revealing that they began to plot on how to solve their dragon problem. In Spyro 3, you are asked a riddle at the beginning of the stage in Haunted Tomb, though you can't answer it right away because you have to ponder this riddle as you run through. But when you get to the end, the same NPC will ask the exact same riddle again. One of the answers that you can choose is a Bandicoot, referring to Crash Bandicoot. In Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, there is an abundance of Spyro Easter eggs littered throughout many levels, from a Spyro dinghy, crystal dragons, and yes, even a giant parade float. The original trilogy's development time was astronomically fast, as Universal wanted to turn a quick profit as quick as possible. This led to Spyro 1, 2, and 3 to come out right after each other in the following years, causing a lot of stress on the developers at Insomniac. When you hatched a dragon egg, there was a preset set of animations. One of the animations was the baby dragons doing the world famous late Michael Jackson moonwalk. Spyro Reignited had a weird marketing scheme. At first, there was little to no marketing for the game, only for the last 2 weeks to go absolutely insane, from Snoop Dogg to a literal fire-breathing drone. It was bizarre, yet perfect. During development, Spyro Reignited had a code name, and it was called Project Falcon, Remember this because it's going to come up again. Activision has started to use the Unreal Engine for many of their games, but Spyro Reignited was Activision's very first project using this world-renowned engine. Spyro's original soundtrack was composed by Stewart Copeland, who was the drummer for the world-famous band The Police. He loved many of the pieces that he made for the series. In fact, he brought a number of them to other projects and even to his live events. Stewart Copeland would then return as an advisor to Spyro Reignited Trilogy for Stefan Vankov, the Toys for Bob audio designer who remastered and reworked his tracks. Stewart Copeland would then decide to make one more track for Spyro, called Tiger Train, which is what is played during the main menu of Spyro Reignited. During the early development process of Spyro the Dragon, one of the names that they settled on was Pete. However, a note was made that a dragon named Pete was probably not a great idea, as Walt Disney of course had the rights to Pete's Dragon. Now, the dragon in this series actually wasn't called Pete, that was the little boy's name. The dragon was actually called Elliot. However, Walt Disney was known for his very staunch use of copyright, and Insomniac felt that it would be best just to avoid the name Pete or anything to do with Disney when it comes to a dragon. Moving on to the body of the iceberg, we got a fact that actually still gets mixed up today. Sony Computer Entertainment America never owned Spyro the Dragon. Spyro, and of course by extension Crash Bandicoot, were always handled and owned by Universal back in the day. While it was Insomniac and Naughty Dog that made the characters, it was on Universal's dime. This is why when Spyro Enter the Dragonfly was handled by a different team, it came out on different platforms beyond Sony's. It is ironic, however, that both Naughty Dog and Insomniac are owned by Sony today. Speaking of Crash and Spyro, in Crash Bandicoot Warped, if you did a modified version of the classic cheat code, the Konami code, it actually boots up a demo for Spyro the Dragon. This is actually how I personally discovered Spyro for the very first time, and I still vividly remember it to this day. Spyro 2 was named Ripto's Rage in North America. However, at the time, the UK felt that the name was way too violent sounding for a kid-targeted product. So, Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage was renamed to Gateway to Glimmer when it released overseas. Speaking of overseas, if you take a look at the Japanese version of Spyro the Dragon, when Spyro's name is written in Japanese, it looks a lot like the word Ripto in English. This is what was the inspiration behind the name Ripto as Spyro 2's main villain. Now, we're going to jump over to a different incarnation of Spyro from the Legend of Spyro series. There is a dark alter ego of Spyro in this universe called Dark Spyro, which is referenced and used in future titles, like Skylanders and even more recently in Crash Team Racing, as we got a take on a reignited version of Dark Spyro as an alternative skin. Speaking of Dark Spyro, both Dark Spyro and Spyro himself showed up in this shockingly short-lived Crash on the Run mobile game as a seasonal theme. This was one of the last seasons that Crash on the Run held before going on hiatus and then shutting down. It just couldn't hold strong like Mario or Sonic Unlimited Runners, right? Speaking of Sonic, when you go to Crystal Islands and talk to Moneybags, he says this, referencing the world-famous blue blur.
You shouldn't anger a magician, Spyro. I just might decide to turn you into a blue hedgehog or something.
Sonic isn't the only reference that we find in Spyro the Dragon. In his very first game, when you save Thomas, he's shocked that such a small dragon could save him.
Wow, I never thought I'd be rescued, especially by such a little dragon. What I mean is, I always believed in you, Spyro.
You gotta believe.
The cadence and tone is directly inspired by another PlayStation 1 star, Parappa the Rapper.
I gotta believe.
Unfortunately, this line would then be botched in Spyro Reignited.
Wow, I never thought I'd be rescued, especially by such a little dragon. What I mean is, I always believed in you, Spyro.
You gotta believe.
Big sad. While Parappa's reference was missed, Bob and Doug's were not. Bob and Doug are bear NPCs in Spyro 3: Year of the Dragon. Living in a frozen wasteland, along with having the thickest Canadian accents ever, it's clear that they were references to Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas's characters on the sketch comedy show The Great White North, who were named Bob and Doug McKenzie. Now, as a Canadian, I very much approve, eh? In Spyro 3, in Harbor Speedway, Sparks asks if you want to race the blue-footed boobies. Now, before you giggle like a schoolgirl, these birds actually do exist and have very, very large blue feet. Honestly, they're kind of cute. But wanna know what you don't get? Blue-footed boobies. Whatever these are, they are not the blue-footed boobies that we were promised. And when Reignited came along, we were not rectified of this gratuitous lie. I want justice for the blue-footed boobies. In the very first trailer of the Spyro Reignited trilogy, we got a quick sneak peek as to what the dragons would look like. We were shown what everyone thought was going to be Nestor. However, this was a temporary stand-in for the beefy lad that we would see later on, and eventually had his scales turn to red and became Oswin in Dark Hollow. In the original Spyro 2, the monk at the end of the level asks you to deal with the Yetis that is causing them problems. However, there is a bit of a discrepancy between the text box and what the voice clip says. While the text box says, "I really think you should torch that Yeti," Brother Ned actually says,
Even though I'm a vegetarian, I think you should kill that Yeti. He's pretty tough, though.
It's likely that the word kill was swapped out, but the dialogue was not. This of course was changed in Spyro Reignited, where Brother Ned matches the text box and says torch. Spyro 3 introduced a ragtag group of creatures that the player can play. The reason behind this was that Insomniac thought that they reached a pretty high plateau for Spyro's moveset. So in order to diversify the gameplay, they introduced 4 new characters with completely different methods of play to spice up the playstyle of Spyro. Of course, Insomniac feeling that they hit the plateau of Spyro's moveset is one of the reasons why they decided to make Spyro 3 their last Spyro title. In Crash Twinsanity, when you reach close to the end, there is a cutscene where Crash Bandicoot's villains want to take a whole pile of treasure. This is discouraged by Cortex because there was a certain, purple dragon who already has laid claim to it.
Personally, I don't care, but I think he might want his gems back.
This, of course, was a way to cross-promote Spyro's new adventure at the time, Spyro: A Hero's Tale. Spyro 3 introduces a set of minigame side missions that revolve around skate parks located throughout the game. Now, you might already know about the cheat codes in Spyro that allow you to change his color, but there is also a cheat code to change the skateboard into a squid board. Yep, you can ride around on a squid. And yeah, this cheat works in the Spyro Reignited trilogy. Speaking of cheat codes, Spyro Reignited introduced new cheat codes that were not in the original games. Spyro with sunglasses, Tiny Head Spyro, Tiny Wing Spyro, and the Retro Spyro code. Additionally, the Nintendo Switch has an exclusive Rainbow Sunglasses cheat code. When the Spyro Reignited trilogy was in development, they did not have access to the original codes and files for the first 3 games. So, instead of guessing where everything was placed, an engineer at Toys for Bob designed a program that they deemed as Spyroscope. This program was an in-house emulation tool that showed the level's exact geometry and placement of items. It essentially allowed Toys for Bob to extract the bones of each level and use it as a foundation for the game. Toys for Bob received most of the credit and acclaim for Spyro Reignited trilogy, but did you know that Sanzaru Games were the main developers for Spyro 3? Unfortunately, Spyro 3 did not hold the same bar of quality that Spyro 1 and 2 had. Many reports of glitches over the years have arisen, with areas of the game that clearly have cut corners. As the game progresses, you see more and more of these cut corners until finally the game's underbaked aspect reaches an eye-bleeding crescendo in the Super Bonus round, most notably in the Yeti racing. There are rumors and reports floating around as to what exactly went wrong, but a lot of the blame was pointed at Sanzaru. Maybe one day we'll find out exactly what happened. Now we are entering the water's surface of this iceberg. Here we go. In Spyro 1, Spyro was voiced by Carlos Alazraqui. However, when we shifted to Spyro 2, that voice was changed to Tom Kenny. Now, why did this change happen? Well, when they initially drafted up Spyro, they wanted to go for a young Bart Simpson kind of voice. However, it's been rumored that Insomniac found that by the end of the recording sessions, Carlos's take on Spyro was a little too annoying. Tom Kenny was brought in to give a more confident and cocky take to the Purple Dragon. This obviously left an impact because when Spyro was being remastered for its Reignited trilogy, Toys for Bob brought Tom Kenny back to not only just revoice his lines from Spyro 2 and 3, but also all of Spyro 1. Additionally, Tom Kenny is arguably one of, if not the most famous voice actors of all time, but his debut role for voicing a character in a video game was Spyro in Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage. While developing Spyro, green and yellow was almost the color scheme that they settled on. However, they found that Spyro blended in too much with a lot of the grassy environments. So they ran Spyro through many different palette swaps until they settled on purple and yellow, which, funny enough, are complementary colors. When Spyro 2 Reignited was in development, there was a number of questions on its cinematics. While many cinematics were just cute and fun, there were a number that were either way too violent, confusing, or just flat out weird. Toys for Bob adjusted some of these cinematics to make more sense, like magma cones and even Sunny Beach. Spyro 2 wasn't the only game to get some cinematic adjustments. Spyro 3 had also gotten some tweaks, but specifically with the, one of the most darkest moments in all the original trilogy.
And I'm going to send it out to destroy all the dragons, even the little hatchlings. Yes, yes, it will smash them and crush them and grind them and tear them. Oh, yes. Smear them and smush them and crack them and grease them.
No, they didn't remove that part. They left that part in. It's actually something that they added. What was added was some dialogue from Agent 9. As in the original cinematic with the Sorceress and Bianca, Agent 9 said nothing, which is kind of hard to believe because he doesn't shut up. So, in Reignited, they gave him some commentary during the whole, baby genocide scene. Continuing with Spyro 3's playable characters, in Desert Ruins, Sheila's playable level is a nod to older 2D platformers, but some have pushed to even say that it's also a reference to Crash Bandicoot, as both Sheila and Crash are marsupials and both animals are native to Australia. It's subtle, but it's there. Now, if you live in Australia, you can take a short flight to a nearby country in which Spyro absolutely bombed in, and that is Japan. Spyro's Japanese ports were absolute failures, flops, you name it, in the land of the rising sun. The reasoning was because of the amount of adjustments that was made to the actual gameplay, as the camera just sits there, being about as useful as a box of matches in a dumpster fire. They also slowed the charge down because playtesters were reporting on a sickness called 3D sickness? Yeah. Overall, Japanese Spyro failed miserably. Back on American soil, an unfortunate fact is that Insomniac, the original developers of Spyro, never had any plans to make a Spyro 4. As soon as they were done with Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon, they knew that they would be moving on to a different project. This of course led to the development of Ratchet & Clank. Spyro Reignited Trilogy's development time was not very long. According to sources and estimates, it was stated that Toys for Bob had just about 11 months of development time. Now, this was before the game was delayed from September to November, so just over a year to remake 3 games from the ground up. That was a huge task for Toys for Bob. Before Spyro Reignited Trilogy was announced, there were a number of Spyro Remaster hint hunters that searched up and down for every hint possible that there was a new game coming, and I was one of them. As we drew closer to the announcement date, we found out that a user that owned the Twitter handle Spyro the Dragon was changed and swapped to a locked private account called Falcon McBob. At the time, when we cross-referenced that name with SAG-AFTRA's listings of projects that they had in development with Activision, one of the project names was Project Falcon. We then watched this Twitter page obsessively until it activated and the Spyro Reignited Trilogy was announced. We later confirmed that Spyro Reignited Trilogy was indeed called Project Falcon. Good times. When Spyro Reignited Trilogy initially released physically, the game could not fit on one disc, prompting for a massive day one patch to play all of Spyro 2 and 3, as the entirety of Spyro 1 was the only game on disc. This would later be rectified as reprints were done that put the entirety of Spyro 2 and 3 on a disc. During Spyro 1's development, Insomniac really wanted to make sure that Spyro's flight and gliding worked and felt great, so they hired Matt Winning, a previous employee from NASA, to make sure that Spyro's physics and flight felt good. One of the flying levels that was remade and reignited was Sunny Flight. At one point, Activision and Toys for Bob held a contest and asked for fans to screenshot their best time to potentially win this Spyro-themed e-scooter. At the moment, we are actually unsure as to who actually won the scooter. In Sheila's original design sketch, she had horns and even had boxing gloves. This later would be removed as it made little to no sense for a kangaroo that only used her feet to attack to have horns and boxing gloves. Speaking of Sheila, when Spyro 3 Reignited started its marketing, they redesigned Sheila, giving her hair and a safari top. This was met with some harsh criticism in the fanbase and caused an all-out comment war on social media, some saying the redesign is great, while others screamed that it was terrible. When Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy came out, there was an interesting code on the main menu. In the original Crash Bandicoot Warped, like we mentioned, when you put in the modified Konami code, up, up, down, down, left, right, square, it would start a Spyro 1 demo. So, in the N. Sane Trilogy, when the same code was put in, the cursor would then abruptly disappear. It was thought that it was a coding clue for it to try and do something, but that something was not yet enabled. Later on, when Spyro Reignited was about to be announced, a video of the Crash mascot was shown punching in the code, and a purple light filling his face and room. After Spyro Reignited was announced, Crash N. Sane was updated so that if you punched in that code, it would start the Spyro Reignited trailer. In the manual for Spyro 1, there is a particularly interesting looking dragon. Its model is never used in the game, and it just so happens to be purple with yellow accents and crests. He also has a medal around his neck, something not seen on any other dragon. It's implied that this is Spyro all grown up in a hypothetical future, with the medal rewarding his efforts in saving the dragons. While Insomniac was figuring out what color to make this dragon, they also struggled with naming him. There were a number of names that were pitched, but the one that they held onto for a while after Pete was Pyro. Pyro, meaning fire, seemingly made the most sense. However, for a reason explained later on in the video, it would then be adjusted to Spyro. We now enter the open water of facts. This is when things start to get interesting. In Spyro 3, Sergeant Byrd led an army of female French hummingbird soldiers. However, when Sergeant Byrd was trapped, the Rhinox invaded their base. Without the leadership of Sergeant Byrd, the hummingbirds were infiltrated, trapped, and caged in 15 minutes. This can also be a light jab at the French, as it's a stereotype that the French give up easily. Continuing with the themes of war, Spyro acts as a double agent playing for both sides for the war between the Land Blubbers and Breeze Builders. When you go to Breeze Builders, there are a number of Land Blubbers invading and causing problems. But when you go to Zephyr, it's the Breeze Builders causing the Land Blubbers problems as well. Spyro really just wants orbs. He really does not care about the results, so he does quests and helps both sides. In Spyro 3, they revealed how dragons actually get the eggs. Every 12 years, on the Year of the Dragon, fairies bring eggs to the Dragon Realms. Dragons from far and wide come together to celebrate and feast as the baby dragons hatch and the next generation of dragonkind begins. This is the starting plot point to Spyro 3. In the original Spyro 3, after you defeat the sorceress, the super bonus round unlocks. However, originally a sparkle tornado was supposed to spawn after the sorceress's defeat right in front of her gate. It would lift you up high and send you to an island where the super bonus round was. However, this would get cut and the super bonus round would be brought closer to players. But in Spyro 3 Reignited, this sparkle tornado was added back in, but it only sends you to a small island that contains 3 lives, as kind of a homage to the original idea. The original Spyro trilogy never had a choice in how difficult it could be. However, Spyro 3 had an interesting background difficulty adaptation system. Put bluntly, the game difficulty would change depending on how well or how bad you played. This was across minigames, bosses, etc. The game adjusted how many hits a boss could take, the placement of enemies, and even the number of enemies. This was likely used as a means to make sure that the game was approachable for younger or less experienced players, and give the more experienced players a challenge. Sadly, this was not translated in Spyro 3 Reignited's development. Spyro 3 Reignited had a lot of questions in terms of difficulty, especially Spike, who was notorious for being the hardest boss in the entire original trilogy. However, he was now seen as just a joke in the remake. The reason being was that Spyro 3 Reignited did not have any background difficulty systems. It's unknown what difficulty was modeled specifically for Spyro 3, but most theorize Sanzaru designed it around the game's easiest difficulty, bringing much disappointment to die-hard Spyro fans. Additionally, the original third game never came to Japan. Both Spyro the Dragon and Spyro and Sparks Ton Demo Tours, yeah, that is really the name of Spyro 2's port in Japan, came out to a mediocre reception. The company that actually did the translating and porting of Spyro had went under after Spyro 2 released. Sadly, due to its poor reception in Japan, Sony didn't even bother with hiring a new company to release a Japanese port of the Year of the Dragon. However, the Spyro Reignited trilogy was ported to the Japanese market, and this would be the first time that Japanese audiences would be able to experience the Year of the Dragon in their native tongue. Charles Zambilis was the character designer behind Crash Bandicoot, but he also designed Spyro the Dragon. In fact, the pose that we see here and when the game was announced is the exact same pose that Charles had for when he submitted his designs to Insomniac. Crash and Spyro having the same character artist isn't where the similarities end. Both Naughty Dog and Insomniac, the developers of Crash and Spyro, both worked in the same building under Universal. During different times of development, Insomniac would sometimes help out Naughty Dog with Crash, and likewise, Naughty Dog would sometimes help out Insomniac with Spyro. Crash and Spyro share the same character artist. The developers worked in the same buildings. What other similarities could be drawn? Well, through a number of crossovers and Easter eggs, it's pretty clear and heavily implied that both Crash and Spyro are canonically in the same universe. This becomes a lot more apparent in Crash Bandicoot 4, with a gigantic Spyro float being used in the background, and in Crash Twinsanity, where Cortex even openly acknowledges Spyro. The original Spyro 1 had a shoestring budget, and this applied to even their cast of characters. Clancy Brown, who ironically starred in Crash Bandicoot, voiced almost all the dragons that you save. This is also hilarious, as Clancy Brown's most known role is Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob SquarePants, and the following year, the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants, Tom Kenny, would take the mantle of voicing Spyro. Now, some of these facts actually draw from my own private and personal visit with Toys for Bob back in 2018, where I got to go and playtest Spyro 3's Dino Mines. So some information draws from that. While developing Spyro Reignited, Toys for Bob was able to get their hands on all of the original sketches, books, and pitches for all 3 Spyro games from Insomniac. This helped them get an idea as to what Insomniac's original ideas were to help with their creative processes. While Spyro Reignited was being promoted, a custom Spyro-themed PlayStation 4 popped up on Twitter. This was a hotly requested console and people wanted to buy it really bad. Sadly, only a limited number of them were made, as it was made in partnership with a Belgian artist, Vadu Emka. Legit though, I would cry if I could get my hands on a PS5 version of this thing. In the very first game, swimming was originally a planned mechanic. However, due to time constraints, this had to be cut from the game and later introduced in Spyro 2. To go along with this, there was also going to be an underwater-themed homeworld. And, according to Oliver Wade, he had sketched an underwater dragon boss along with a Amish dolphin rider. Yep. Yeah, you heard me right. Amish dolphin rider. Now, there was also another cut world, but there is significantly less information about it, apparently called the Machinists. Originally, these dragons were a clan of engineers that would make robots. While there is very little that is known about these so-called Machinists, I will point out that it's interesting that one of the bosses for the Beastmakers is a gigantic robot, and the final Nork worlds are very industrialized. I'm not claiming this as a fact, I'm just saying that these levels could have been recycled from the initial Machinist worlds. Originally, the balloonists that got you from world to world were actually Viking boatmen, according to these early screenshots of Spyro 1. Additionally, in the exact same photos, we actually can see that the dragons stuck in crystal looked more like stone and definitely don't look like the crystal dragon statues that we all know and love today. As we plunge deeper into the murky depths, we might be starting to answer some of the questions that have been on the minds of fans for years. The lack of female dragons was always something that confused many fans. Why was it literally just a bunch of dudes? Well, this problem was actually really straightforward. Insomniac had a shoestring budget with the first game and had limited access to cast, and the cast just so happened to be all male. So every dragon followed suit. Additionally, the very first Spyro game's development started with only 6 people. It would eventually grow to 13 throughout the game's development, but again, the shoestring budget that they had didn't allow for too many people to work on the game. But even with a small team, they were able to make a fantastic, long-lasting experience. Also, ever wonder why Spyro was on all 4 legs, but the other adult dragons were bipedal? Well, the PlayStation 1 had limited access with its polygon count. Insomniac found that it was hard for these dragons to emote if they were on all 4s like Spyro, and they couldn't afford more polygons. So they made the adult dragons stand on 2 legs to let their arms emote and express what they're saying. While Spyro Reignited did a great job on either preserving what was already there or making a change that overall would be for the better, there was a lot of debate online about one specific change, and that was Twilight Harbor. More specifically, the Nork Commandos. In the original game, they had numerous actual, literal military-grade looking weaponry, like AK-47s and machine guns, but in Spyro Reignited, they were replaced with guns that shot what looks a bit like goo or slime. There were a few rumors floating around as to why, like Toys for Bob didn't want the game to get hit with a T rating from the ESRB, or that Toys for Bob just felt that actual military-grade weapons that looked too much like actual guns did not fit in the world of Spyro. Either way, it's a change that's definitely gotten the fan base in a tizzy in the past, but has definitely settled down now. One feature that originates all the way back to even the first game is that gems will glint at any range, even if they are not rendered in yet, allowing you an easier time to find them. Speaking of gems, gems were used as the main collectible, as it's stereotypical for dragons to have a treasure hoard of gold and gems. It's not clear where the stereotype totally originated from, but the most clear example of it today is Smaug from Tolkien's Hobbit. However, it has been said that Smaug was inspired by the story of Beowulf, which included a dragon that was enraged that someone stole from its treasure and begins a rampage. So yeah, a little fun sneak peek behind the stereotype to why dragons hoard treasure. When Astor actually begins talking about how much treasure the dragons have, he gets mixed up on whether or not they have 12,000 or 14,000 treasure. The reason being is that he is old and he forgets that Gnasty has already stolen 2,000 treasure. But when you 100% the game, your treasure total is 12,000. But when you get access to Gnasty's loot, which has the stolen 2,000 treasure, it adds to a grand total of 14,000. Agent 9, the crazy experimental monkey with a gun, was going to have his own spin-off title, called Prime 8. There was even some weird prototype footage floating around giving an idea to what it would look like. However, quite early on in its development, the idea of it being an Agent 9 spin-off would be scrapped and the game would be rebranded to Death Jr. and released on the PSP. During the PlayStation 1's early life, Mark Cerny felt that it did not have enough family-friendly titles. Nintendo was dominating the kids market at the time and he wanted to try to compete with them with their own set of kid-friendly games. This actually helped Insomniac while they were planning out which game to develop, and it would eventually lead to the development of Spyro the Dragon. Spyro wasn't the only game that was pitched as Insomniac's first title under Universal, however, as the game that would eventually become Resistance Fall of Man was also pitched alongside Spyro. But, after much consideration, they decided to develop Spyro first, but would later on release Resistance Fall of Man for the PlayStation 3. Now, let's shift our gears a little bit. The end of Dawn of the Dragon is very open-ended. We are not sure if Spyro and Cinder are actually, well, alive, but the one thing we can see is that while Spyro in the end does save the world, it's not completely in one piece. As you can see, large sections are still floating in the sky. However, during the end sequences, we can see the denizens working to rebuild their homes on these floating islands. The next time we see Spyro is in Skylanders, where floating islands are everywhere in the world, called the Skylands. It's theorized that the end of Dawn of the Dragon is actually the beginning of the Skylanders. Now, remember that adaptive difficulty that was in the original Spyro 3 but was not in the Spyro 3 Reignited? Well, at one point, there may have been something to replace that. When digging around in the files of Spyro Reignited, a difficulty mode was discovered. It allowed you to choose how easy or how hard the game was. Ultimately, it did not make it into the final game, likely because the original first two games had a set difficulty. Darks is Spyro's best friend and sidekick, and according to a post on PlayStation.com, he would crawl around on Spyro's egg before he hatched. He would describe the world to Spyro during each passing day. One day, however, a bird tried to swoop down and grab Sparks, but Spyro saved them just in the nick of time, solidifying their relationship. Oliver Wade, Spyro 2. Here is Brian on the wall of Summer Forest, and in Winter Tundra, you can also see the name Brenda, a nice little homage to his children. After Spyro's would eventually become Ratchet and Clank, Universal handed Spyro over to a company called Check 6, which would eventually become the hot mess that was Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. While Stuart Copeland did agree to compose a soundtrack for the game like he did for the previous, Spyro was probably up.
Neither ain't so nice, not to mention troubles with sparks and bubbles. Chickens on the run, frozen in their tracks. Hope that purple dragon don't come back. Don't come back.
Dragon's Day Off. It begins after speaking to a member of the Black Dragon Flight named Vazalia. She is tired and just wants to relax after fighting for all of her life. She wants nothing more than to relax with a cold drink in her hand. So she asks if you can help by getting her a number of Flame Slinger Rum, Riptide Brew, Pop Fizz Punch, Happy Trigger Sour, Slam Bam Swill, Whirlwind Wine, and Stealthy Elven Port. Once complete, you will receive a little battle pet that is a purple dragon whelp called Spyrogos. The description even says, "This little dragon is all fired up." It looks like he's got some things to plot point of Spyro 2, where Spyro just wants to go on vacation and drown many people trying to reboot him, and he almost fell victim to the dark, edgy reboots that plagued us all in the late 2000s. Spyro Revolution was a TV show pitch that basically made Spyro look like a gargoyle and be dark and edgy. Fortunately for all of us, it did not pass the concept art phase and was only a pitch. Thank goodness. After Pete, the name that Insomniac started to settle on was Pyro. However, Mark Cerny and Insomniac had heard of an internal theory that claimed that mascot characters should have 5 letters to their name, examples like Mario, Sonic, and even his closely related orange friend, Crash. So they decided to see if they could figure out a brand new name with 5 letters, but this eventually led to simply adding an S, which created the name Spyro. We are now entering the deep, dark depths of Spyro. Some of these facts aren't even known by Spyro aficionados, including myself when I started this video. So, without further ado, let's dive in. In Spyro 3, when you get to the second homeworld, there are a number of paintings that have a secret message on them. When you look closely, you can see the word Parvinder. No, this is not the name of the artist of these pieces, but of a mother. Back when Spyro Reignited was delayed, a user by the name of the Chrono Shadow made a request on Reddit. Spyro was their very first game, and they would play it often with their mother. However, their mother was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, and because of the delay, they were unsure if they would be able to play together. Chrono Shadow asked if it was possible that in some small way, if his mother's name could be immortalized in Spyro 3, which was the very first Spyro game they ever played together. His mother's name was Parvinder. It can get very sad in the abyss. Crystal Islands was originally supposed to be a forest level, with bears and beavers, oh my. According to Oliver Wade, however, character designs for each level were literally made in one sitting. Once they were done, that was it. However, later on, this level was completely scrapped and changed into a crystal theme, which made the characters, like the bears, no longer make so much sense. So, to save time, they simply turned them into crystal bears. Problem solved. Allura is a fawn, you dork. But in her original sketch, Oliver Wade said that Allura was not a fawn, and even decided to redraw his original sketch for us, showing us that in fact she was going to be a centaur. So why the change? Well, it was that dreaded polygon count. Allura's extra legs took way too many polygons, which of course means less details that could be made on her model. So they chopped off the back 2 legs and made her a fawn. Continuing with Oliver Wade's comments, one of the early iterations for Moneybags was actually a rhino instead of a bear. Additionally, Agent 9 had 2 pitches. One was for a gun-wielding space monkey, and the other was for a pig. Yep, a pig. Oliver Wade actually really liked the idea of Agent 9 being a pig, but Ted Price, the current president of Insomniac, wanted the space monkey. And so, Space Monkey Agent 9 is what we got. While Spyro was not incredibly popular in Japan, there was a crazy looking device that you could grab if you were a Spyro fan and wanted to have a Spyro experience on the go. The Pocket Station was a mini console that was exclusively released in Japan. It was a memory card peripheral and would allow you to play different games that were unlocked when you got them. Spyro the Dragon and Spyro 2 both had their own mini-games on the Pocket Station. Spyro 2 had 3 homeworlds: Summer Forest, Autumn Plains, and Winter Tundra, clearly following the seasons. However, a rumor started years ago that there was a cut homeworld, which would have been spring-themed. This was further fueled by the fact that Autumn Plains is so massive, and many speculated that the levels that would have been in the spring homeworld were combined into Autumn Plains. This theory literally lasted for decades. It was legend. Until Oliver Wade revealed that in fact there was no spring homeworld planned, which was kinda sad. Now, at one point, Toys for Bob at least considered the hover from Spyro 2 and 3 to be in their first game. There was some cut dialogue from Thomas where he suggests that you could hover at the end of your glide.
Hey, Spyro! Press the jump button twice to glide, and then press the action button at the end of your glide to hover. And don't be afraid.
Afraid? Of what?
Of course, in the end, Toys for Bob opted to stay true to the original games. In one of the very early builds of Spyro, Nasty's loot was actually called Nasty Booty, which, of course, is hilariously inappropriate for a kid's game, but it was still pretty funny. In the original town square, the bulls that were seen running around have a dark green look to them. However, in Spyro Reignited, they were swapped to being light brown. But when you go digging through the Spyro Reignited files, you actually can find a reignited bull that had the same shape and color as the original bulls in Town Square. But of course, these were swapped. Remember how they were supposed to be swimming in a water homeworld in Spyro 1? Well, according to Oliver Wade, the upper half of Aquaria Towers is actually recycled of the original underwater homeworld that was planned for the first game. Kirsten von Schreven, one of the developers on the original game, claimed that Cliff Town was heavily inspired by Star Wars, specifically Tatooine. When Activision was doing its ad campaign for Spyro Reignited, one of the things this ad campaign did was create a drone that was in the shape of Spyro to fly it across America and deliver a copy of the game to Snoop Dogg. Yeah, this was real. I know, it sounds wild, but here's the thing. This drone could actually breathe fire. Now, here's where things get a little crazy. Because this drone can breathe fire, it now technically can be classified as a UCAV, or an unmanned combat aerial vehicle, which is a military combat drone. So yes, theoretically, Spyro can be used for war crimes. When Toys for Bob started development for Spyro Reignited Trilogy, the dragons were originally going to follow what the original game did, just a few kinds of dragons with some colors swapped. We can even see a very early look at Astor, the very first dragon that we see in the game. However, as the Toys for Bob artists got to work, they slowly started to add, little details like different horns, different spikes, and then a hat, and then props, and then accessories. Before they knew it, the very plain Jane dragons that they started with turned into a gigantic creative outlet for the artists that let their imaginations go wild. When they added the S to Pyro to make it 5 letters like the internal theory suggested, there was also a theory that suggests that the S was not completely random. Pyro in Greek means fire, but Spyro, S-P-I-R-O, is Latin for breath. Putting the words together to create Spyro seems like a nod to the name meaning fire breath, which is the perfect name for a little dragon. The dark and edgy Spyro was actually not the first attempt at making a Spyro TV show. In early 2012, a company named Moonscoop heard that Activision was thinking of making a TV show starring the Purple Dragon. The company started to draft up some sketches, and of course, I hired our resident thumbnail artist, Melva Honeybee, to make a high-definition version of those sketches. However, Activision would eventually make Skylanders Academy as their Spyro-directed TV show. Now, we finally get to the bottom of this iceberg, the bottom of the abyss, the very, very final facts. For this one, I wanted to try and find a fact that was not yet shared or known when it comes to Spyro. Something that would catch all of you Spyro aficionados by surprise. So I went and searched for something that no one knew yet, something that wasn't even on the internet, and I believe I have found it. I emailed a couple people to finally get my hands on this information, and I also can confirm this information because when I went to Toys for Bob, they actually had Insomniac's original binders that cataloged every pitch, level, and character. Now, you have heard of Pete, and you may have even heard of Dragon Game when it was pitched by Craig Stitt back in December 1996, but there was one name and pitch that I believe no one has shared yet. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Pierre. At one point, a design pitch for what would eventually become Spyro was the idea of a young dragon who was a prankster. He just learned how to breathe fire and now wanted to show it off by playing tricks and pranking people. Remember how one of Spyro's inspirations was Bart Simpson, but after Spyro 1, Insomniac pulled away from that? Yeah, this incarnation was definitely more in line with that Bart Simpson counterpart. Also, we have a little story pitch for the character as well. Here is how the game was apparently going to go. Once upon a time, there was a small green dragon, and his name was Pierre. Pierre was only a young dragon. He was 113 years old. Now, since Pierre was just getting his firepower, he liked to play tricks on people with his fire. After he got out of school, he would go into the forest and sneak up on people who were fishing or picking apples or digging a hole, and he would go whoom and fire them right in the bum. The people would go running saying, "Pierre, you are a silly, mean dragon." It's actually insane that I was able to get my hands on this, as I was able to also get some other really cool tidbits of information for early iterations of Spyro, which I will be sharing more about in a future video. But what if there was a fact that was in fact below the abyss? Oh, wait. It's the end. Well, this concludes my biggest Spyro video literally ever. This one was a real challenge and I love doing it. If you want to check out the potential origin story of Gnasty Gnorc, I suggest you click this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more Spyro content. Happy Spyro Community Day, everybody, and I can't wait to soar on new adventures with all of you in the future. Bye-bye!